Hey guys, what is happening? So I have not done one of these in a while, and I figured what better way is there to put off all of the writing that I need to do than by talking about all the writing that I've already done. Also, I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself, reintroduce myself, or just say hey to everyone out there in the world, wherever you are. And so hey. My name is Brianna Gravatt, and I am a writer, a poet, an art historian, sometimes a photographer, and depending on the day, you may have other words that you might choose to call me. But for the moment, let's stick with writer. And 2 years ago, I wrote a book, and I called it Mosaic. And I wrote it in the hopes that whatever, in all of my life experiences, I felt alone. Even though I was surrounded by an incredible family and a wonderful group of friends, I felt alone, and it was probably one of the worst feelings in the world. And I just hope that by putting these words down on paper that I might be able to make someone else, if they were to read this, feel less alone. Whether they're experiencing a loss or a death, or in the case of what I posted yesterday, a divorce. And so yesterday in my story, I don't know if anybody saw it or not, but I had some excerpts from my chapter on divorce, and I just wanted to read a little bit more about it, just to get this book out there a little more in the world. From Mosaic. Soon after, the leaves fell, and then the snows, and it was winter. It was a winter without the sun, without warmth, without Oliver. The envelope was postmarked December 24th. I knew what it was, and still I opened it. Papers with his signature, papers with mine. Some inks are permanent. That Christmas, for the first time, there were only 5 of us eating leftovers at an otherwise empty table. My winter had begun. January arrived, and with it a new decade. Overcome by an indescribable grief, there were days where I found myself on the floor, unable to escape the ground that constantly gave way beneath my feet, where I learned that sometimes the bottom is not always made of rocks. Sometimes there is no bottom at all. Determined to find answers where often there are none, I continuously researched the Kubler-Ross model in order to construct a timeline of just how long it would take for me to get over Oliver, as if divorce was a chronological event in which progress is made from one stage to the next without relapsing into the previous stage. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression. These first 4 I had down to an art form, especially anger. But the last one, acceptance, that was going to take a while. I did not know it then, just how overrated anger actually is. In those nights too long and those days too short, I did not know the difference between struggle and surrender. And so at all hours of the day, I showed up at my mother's doorstep and crawled inside of her arms and begging her to take my pain away, to make it stop, but she could do none of that. All she could do was hold me and tell me that not all love was lost, just one. Just one. Then, as now, as always, my mother was and is my sun, my moon, my North Star, my Southern Cross, my light in the darkness, except she is the opposite of gravity. When I have fallen, when any of us have fallen, she pulls us up. That winter I went to Paris, even though this was not something that I could actually afford, especially since I had my bank on speed dial, just to determine whether or not food was a viable option on the days in between my paychecks. But still, I went to Paris nevertheless with my old friend Nina to stand in front of the Eiffel Tower again, just as I did before all of this began, without knowing how it would end. Of course, like a fool, I went to London first, because it was cheaper and easier to fly to England. Never mind the fact that enough miles had been earned over the years for a free flight to anywhere in Europe, and because that is also where Nina lived. It was most certainly not because Oliver was there, and I still loved him. Definitely not because of that. In January, I found myself in his flat, sitting across from my now ex-husband, as he held a new book in his hands. He wore reading glasses around his wrist, there was a new tattoo. So different than the tattoos that stretched between his shoulder blades and graced the cuneate muscles of his arm. That night, I slept on the pull-out couch in the living room as he slept in his bed upstairs. In the morning, he woke me up before he left for work to say one final goodbye. He kissed me on the cheek, close to my lips, with his hand lingering on my hip. He smiled as he walked out the door, never to be seen again. After Paris, I returned to an apartment, empty except for the memories that hung in the air, and a lifetime of books on the shelf. All too willing to remain in the darkness of my own making, I lit few candles and stared at the titles that leaned against the wall. In the flickering light, the wings of a butterfly caught my eye. Papillon. This is the book that Oliver was reading the night that we first met. And as I leafed through its pages, I wondered whether it was the imprisonment that Oliver identified with most, or was it the escape? Unable to understand or accept the ambiguity of this life, I went outside and pulled a cigarette from the pack that I bought for moments such as this, and lit one cigarette and then another, and watched the rings of blue smoke rise into the cold, cold night. Not easily overcome with religious zeal or political fervor, but terrified by my own heartache and spellbound by the ends of the cigarettes, burning harsh and red, I decided to have my own fallo del cuero, a bonfire of my heart. Somehow I led myself to believe that if there was nothing left to remind me of Oliver, that the pain would go away. That if I didn't have the letters that he wrote or the cards that he sent, that I too could pretend that he did not exist. So a match was lit, and into the pyre went photographs of the two of us dancing to Ben Harper on our wedding day, us returning to San Francisco after an afternoon of drinking Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa Valley, and us on the bow of a sailboat watching the sky go from blue to indigo to black to night. Us smiling, us happy, us laughing. Birthday cards, love notes, not so love notes, and letters that told of a forever that ceased to exist. As the last of flames turned ashes into dust, I thought to myself, how tightly we cling to our failures, how lightly we embrace our successes. Long after the fire went out, I held on to Oliver. It took years to let him go. So there you have it, an excerpt on divorce from Mosaic. Get yourself a copy. It's on Amazon, and I'll see you around.